Good afternoon, and thank you for your presentation. And I would like to talk, as the title of my paper says, about Utopia and Gerónimo de Medinilla, and compare it to Ramón Esquerra. The time gap between these two characters, of these two authors, is of 300 years. In 1637, Gerónimo de Medinilla, a Spanish courtier, translated Utopia by Thomas More and printed it in Córdoba, in Spain. This was the first Spanish translation ever published. According to the paratext of the work, the reason behind this translation might be Quevedo's concern for the political instability of Spain after the decline of the Spanish Empire. We know by some letters between Quevedo and a Castilian courtier that Quevedo, Francisco de Quevedo, already acquainted Medinilla sometime before, so it is not a coincidence that Quevedo appears in those paratexts. For the translator and Quevedo, Utopia was an essential moral work that might serve as a manual for the good government. If political leaders started reading this work and applying the moral behaviors it proposes, they thought that the country's crisis and corruption might recover and become further. What we can say about Medinilla is that he was corregidor. He had a political position in the city of Córdoba. And maybe after reading the text and preparing this translation, he might support his own government as well as show his knowledge on translation. However, this translation is not complete, as it just includes Book 2, and Book 1 was left untranslated. The reason for this exclusion might be the presence of the Spanish Inquisition, the institution that controlled everything that was written so to protect the Catholic Church from the advance of Protestantism. It is remarkable that some extracts from Utopia were censored in the Index et Catalogus Librorum Prohibitorum, which was published in 1583 by Gaspar de Quiroga, and all of these extracts and quotes were extracted from Book 1. Within this text, Gaspar de Quiroga explains that although Thomas More was a staunch supporter of Catholicism, the Inquisition might have thought people could misunderstand Utopia. So there would be a distortion of the meaning of the text words. So the attitude could be a threat for the Church and its believers. Also, Medinilla even justifies his translation in the Nota al Capítulo Noveno, or note chapter 9, which deals with religion. And within this chapter, he defends Catholicism and he fosters the figure of Christ. So he didn't pretend to show anti-Catholicism. To sum up, the main particularity of this edition, apart from what I have already mentioned about the partial translation, is that its paratextual elements frame and contextualize the work into the 17th century. Later on, Medinilla translation was reedited. There were some modifications, especially in the paratext, and they were published in 1790 and 1805. So, if this was not the complete translation, where are we going to find the complete one? In 1937, 3 centuries later, and in the middle of the Spanish Civil War, Ramón Esquerra, a Catalan literary critic, published Utopia within the publisher Apollo, and he titled it Utopia, the Perfect State. In Spanish, it was Utopía, el Estado Perfecto. Before moving into the description of the work, I would like to address Esquerra's life, because it might be interesting to understand why he did this translation. Ramón Esquerra was born in 1909, and he devoted part of his life to the comparative study of literature. more specifically English, Spanish, and Catalan literature. He was really interested in English literature when he was young. He started reading Oscar Wilde's works and Daniel Defoe's masterpieces. But then, after finishing his degree in law, he decided to continue acquiring more knowledge, and he studied arts, and then he obtained a PhD in modern philology. As an intellectual who defended Catalan culture from the dictatorial regime of Primo de Rivera in a pro-European mind, Ramón Esquerra combined reading articles and texts for the press in Barcelona, like the one for the journal El Matí or Mirador. He combined this with teaching French at several institutions. Our author was killed in 1938 fighting in the Civil War. Regarding his literary career, Ramón Esquerra pursued the publication of several comparative academic texts like Stendhal in Spain, Shakespeare in Catalonia, Montaigne and Quevedo, and Victor Hugo in Spain. Although he is not framed into the historical and cultural period of the Noucentism, he shares many features, and it is captured in some of his works, where he promotes Catalan culture at the level of the European one. In 1936, he started working with the publishing house Apollo, the one in which he published Utopia, and he also rendered some texts like Did You Send by François Mauriac in 1936, Utopia, and Two or Three Graces by Aldous Huxley in 1938. He also published some literary manuals like Introduction to Literature in 1937, and Literary Vocabulary in 1938, and then some literary articles like The Situation of the Contemporary English Novel, and a text about the Nobel Prize from 1938, Roger Martin Dugard. Now, moving to the work itself, I would like to mention some details about the publisher. As I said, it's Apollo, a small Catalan publishing house born at the end of the 1920s. This publisher aimed to satisfy the audience desires and bring them the most universal authors and works. So for this, they ranged over many topics for the collections, from arts and humanities to experimental science, sociology, psychoanalysis. There, they decided to publish Utopia. Also, about this work, the translation was based in G.H. Lupton's edition from 1895, which was published in Oxford. This edition presented two utopias, one in English and another one in Latin. The Latin text is the Latin edition published in 1518, the one published in Brussels, and it is relevant that the English version is not Lupton's own translation, but he uses Ralph Robinson's translation from 1551, which was the first translation made into English of Utopia. The work has two clear sections. On the one hand, the prologue and the translation. The prologue was written by Ramón Esquerra himself, and it is divided into 6 sections, with the final one is a kind of bibliographical, with some kind of bibliographical references. I would like to pay more attention to the prologue, because I believe it is more relevant to obtain some details about the author and the aim of the translation, and even his opinion on Thomas More. The first chapter is called Retrato del Canciller, a portrait of the Chancellor, and presents a consistent biography on Thomas More. Esquerra seemed to have sound knowledge on the life of Thomas More, because he's able to talk about More's family and environment, as well as the ideas the Chancellor transmitted in his work. Also for this, he supports with some quotes by Erasmus on Thomas More, and also he quotes the biography by Daniel Sargent and William Roper, who was Margaret Moore's husband. Ramón Esquerra had already made a biography on Thomas More before the publishing of this translation, and it was done in 1934 in the journal El Matí. There he depicted More as with his three faces, and it refers and mentions that More was canonized in 1935. Then the following section is a portrait by Holbein, Un retrato de Holbein. This book includes several illustrations about More and Utopia. He includes a picture of the sketch of the portrait by Holbein. Within this chapter, Esquerra narrates the encounter between Holbein and More and provides a detailed description of the portraits and some members of the family, like John More, the father of Thomas More, Alice More, and Margaret More, together with her siblings. I would like to highlight the fact that the translator seizes the opportunity to highlight More's beliefs in education and also women's education. Esquerra serves for more words to Erasmus and Gunnell to explain his thoughts and how they are captured in Utopia. Now, moving from the general to the specific, Ramón Esquerra pays attention to the birth of Utopia in his section Nace Utopia. According to the author, the origin of More's most famous text lies in trade conflicts between the Low Countries and English at the time he was at the Flemish land, in 1514. Thus, More decides to talk about an utopian nation, or as he himself means in the title of the work, he proposes a perfect state. In the remaining chapter, Esquerra pursues to provide his own interpretation of the text by discussing its imagery and ideas, as well as looking for references from classical works like Plato's, Augustine of Hippos, or Erasmus. In connection to this, the translation leaves a section called Bajo el signo de Platón, under the sign of Plato, in which he parallels Utopia with the Republic written by Plato. And also he provides some parallelisms to the current time of the translator. Esquerra devotes the fifth chapter to the fortune of Utopia in Spain. It is called Fortuna Hispánica de Utopía. In this section, Esquerra makes a revision of the different versions and translations of Utopia since its publication in 1518. There were 15 Latin editions, the German translation of 1524, 2 Italian, 2 German, and 2 Dutch translations in the 16th century. And also, he mentions the 3 English versions in the second half of the 16th century. In addition, he talks about Medinilla's work, the one I presented in the introduction, and he defends and praises the role of Quevedo within this translation. So, at the end of this chapter, the Catalan critic points out the existence of 2 later editions, and also the publication of a Catalan edition in 1812 by Josep Pini Soler. This was published under the frame of Noucentisme. What we can obtain from this is that Esquerra's text was not the first complete translation found in the peninsula, because the Catalan edition was published before. And as a curiosity, I would like to mention that in the case of Portugal, Portuguese language, it is not possible to find any translation until 1937. But surprisingly, it was published in Brazil. In his last section, more kind of bibliographical one, Esquerra makes reference to the celebration of the 4th anniversary, the 400 years since More's death. It was 1935. Which, according to the translator, might have triggered also the production of new articles and works. Then he lists down the name of several biographies, like Bremont's, published in Paris, 1904, Sargent's, also published in Paris in 1935, and Chambers, from 1935. Also, he mentions the monographs on socio-political issues in Utopia, highlighting Kautsky Thomas Morus Untitled Utopia, written in 1888, and works on the study of More's ideas like Dermen's Thomas More's Les Utopistes de la Renaissance, Dudoc's Sir Thomas More and His Utopia, and Pierre Menard, L'essor de la philosophie politique au XVIe siècle. In the end, he mentioned some Latin editions, highlighting the one he used. Considering now the translation itself, the text includes the letter to Peter Giles and the two books. But before this text, he includes the text written by Quevedo, which was found in Medinilla, which was a kind of recommendatory text talking about the translation by Medinilla. As a conclusion, there are still many important aspects to analyze and study in this work. Especially, I would like to focus on the future in the work of Ramón Esquerra. Nevertheless, what we can say is that in the same way Medinilla published his text in 1637 in order to teach and promote good patterns of behaviors, Esquerra seemed to imitate his intentions, but bearing in mind the different historical contexts. In a nutshell, these Spanish utopias had a clear pedagogical intention behind them, which was a common reality in humanism. The different aspects and information found in its prologue help us approach the figure of the literary critic and journalist Ramón Esquerra, and although he might not be aware of the fact his work was the first complete translation into Spanish, it helps us configure the socio-literary study of Thomas More in Spain. Thank you.